The directive arrived on a frigid Tuesday morning in October, delivered by a granite-faced major whose gaze avoided mine entirely. 24 hours to gather my unit. 48 hours until wheels up. Antarctica. Communications relay installation, they claimed. Total radio blackout once we touched down. I'd been expecting this type of operation for months. The sort that arrives drowning in classification stamps with zero explanations attached. The major slid a manila envelope across my desk, thick with personnel dossiers and deployment timelines, then vanished without the usual pleasantries about weather or weekend plans. Communications relay, I repeated under my breath, leafing through the papers. Because clearly, the Army needed a full colonel and 24 enlisted men to set up radio equipment at the bottom of the earth. The personnel selection was fascinating. They'd given me some of my finest operators. Marcus, who'd been guarding my six for 15 years, and Patrick, who could adapt to any crisis thrown his way. But scattered among them were specialists I'd never worked alongside. Soldiers whose files contained more black bars than actual text. The type recruited for missions that, officially, never happened. I spent the remainder of that day placing calls, leveraging connections, and slicing through red tape. By 1800 hours, I had my unit assembled in Briefing Room C at Fort Bragg. 24 men, all wearing expressions suggesting they'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. "Gentlemen," I announced, taking position at the front with my hands locked behind my back. "We're heading to Antarctica." Several groans erupted, accompanied by muttered complaints about the brutal cold. Marcus lifted an eyebrow but stayed silent. He knew better than to question orders in front of the others. "Our mission involves establishing a communications grid in a remote zone. We'll be completely isolated. Zero outside contact once we're operational. The weather window is tight, so we move fast and we move smart." Private First Class Danny raised his hand. The kid looked barely 22, still carried that enthusiastic expression that hadn't been worn away yet. "Sir, what's our timeline looking like?" "Classified," I answered, which was the truth. The orders contained no return schedule, just referenced mission completion in that vague way, meaning someone else would decide when we came home. Patrick leaned back in his chair, those sharp green eyes absorbing every detail. "What type of communications grid, sir?" "The type that operates in sub-zero conditions and doesn't ask questions," I replied. A few chuckles rippled through the group. "Equipment list is in your folders. Study it tonight. We deploy at 0600 Thursday." The briefing continued for another hour, covering cold weather procedures, equipment verification, and standard warnings about hypothermia and frostbite. Standard material, except for the radio silence part. That was unusual, even for classified operations. Paused. After dismissing the unit, Marcus remained behind. He waited until the room emptied, then walked to my desk. "Jim," he said, abandoning military formality now that we were alone. "What's really going on here?" I looked at my oldest friend, this man who'd pulled me out of more deadly situations than I could remember. His brown eyes showed the same unease I'd been feeling since the major entered my office. "I wish I knew, Marcus. Orders came from way up the food chain, above my clearance level. Communications grid in Antarctica." He shook his head. "Since when do we need a full platoon to install radios?" "Since someone decided we do." I gathered the files, shoving them back into the envelope. "Look, I don't like being kept in the dark any more than you do, but we have our orders." Marcus nodded, though I could tell he wasn't satisfied. Neither was I, but that's how the military works. You get your orders, you execute them, and you ask questions later if you're lucky enough to survive whatever they sent you to do. The next 2 days flew by in a whirlwind of equipment checks, medical examinations, and the endless paperwork that accompanies any deployment. The gear list was comprehensive: cold weather clothing, survival equipment, and enough communications hardware to outfit a small installation. But items on the manifest made no sense for a simple radio setup. Ground-penetrating radar, excavation equipment, thermal imaging systems, I cornered the supply sergeant about it, but he just shrugged. Orders came down from division, sir. I just pack what they tell me to pack. Thursday morning broke gray and bitter with that October chill that promised winter's arrival. The team gathered on the tarmac at 0430, looking like a bunch of walking sleeping bags in their cold weather gear. The transport was a C-130, the kind of workhorse that could touch down on ice and lift off again if the pilot knew his business. "Listen up," I called out as we loaded equipment. "Once we're airborne, we're committed. No phone calls home, no emails, no contact with anyone outside this operation." Pause. Specialist Miguel raised his hand. "Sir, what about emergency contacts?" "Family notifications handled through command channels only." It was a standard response that didn't really explain anything. Your families know you're deployed. That's all they need to know. The flight to Antarctica consumed 18 hours, with refueling stops in Chile and New Zealand. Most of the men slept, but I spent the time reviewing mission files again, hunting for details I might have missed. The communications equipment specifications were legitimate, high-frequency radios built for polar environments. But the secondary equipment list kept bothering me. Why did we need ground-penetrating radar to install radio towers? We touched down at McMurdo Station just long enough to refuel and collect additional cold weather gear. The base commander, a Navy captain with 20 years of ice experience, pulled me aside while the crew serviced the aircraft. "You sure about this location, Colonel?" He showed me our destination on a satellite map. "That's pretty far from anything. No research stations, no established supply lines." "Orders are orders, Captain." He nodded, but his expression indicated he'd seen enough classified missions to know when something didn't add up. "Well, you've got good weather for the next 72 hours. After that, there's a storm front moving in that'll keep you grounded for at least a week." The final leg took us over endless white wilderness, broken only by occasional mountain peaks or crevasse fields. The pilot, a warrant officer with more ice time than anyone had a right to survive, brought us down on a flat section of ice sheet that looked identical to every other flat section we'd passed over. "This is it, sir," he called back from the cockpit. "GPS coordinates match your orders." I peered out the small window at absolutely nothing. No landmarks, no structures, just white ice extending to the horizon in every direction. Wind was already picking up, blowing snow across the landing zone in sheets that cut visibility to maybe 50 meters. All right, people. The following few hours were organized chaos. 24 soldiers working in sub-zero temperatures to establish a temporary base in the middle of nowhere. We erected the command tent first, then sleeping quarters, then equipment storage. Everything had to be secured against wind that seemed determined to blow our entire operation back to civilization. By the time we had camp established, the transport had already vanished, disappearing into the gray sky like it never existed. The engine sounds faded, leaving us with nothing but wind and snow crunching under our boots. "Cozy," Marcus commented, surveying our new home. The command tent flapped in the wind, despite being anchored with ice screws and guy lines. "Remind me to write a thank you note to whoever picked this vacation spot." I checked my watch. 1,400 hours local time, though local time meant little when you had 24 hours of daylight. Let's get the communications equipment operational. Sooner we finish this mission, sooner we go home. The work was routine, but exhausting in the cold. We installed radio equipment according to specifications, ran antenna cables, and established a basic communications network. Everything functioned exactly as advertised. By the end of the third day, we had a fully operational radio station capable of reaching anywhere on the planet, which made it even more puzzling when the new orders arrived. I was in the command tent, running a final systems check, when the encrypted message came through. The printer chattered to life, spitting out a single page that changed everything. The message was brief and direct. Our real mission had nothing to do with communications equipment. 3 weeks ago, a research satellite had detected an anomalous structure buried beneath the ice sheet at our exact coordinates. Ground-penetrating radar had confirmed something large and artificial, approximately 30 meters below the surface. Our job was to dig it up. I read the message 3 times, then stepped outside into the perpetual daylight. Wind had calmed down, leaving the landscape eerily quiet. Somewhere beneath my feet, buried under 30 meters of ice, was something that didn't belong there. I gathered the team in the command tent an hour later. 24 faces stared back at me, ranging from curious to concerned to downright suspicious. These were good soldiers, and good soldiers could smell deception from a mile away. "Gentlemen," I began, holding up the printed orders, "there's been a modification in mission parameters." Marcus's expression didn't change, but I saw his shoulders tense slightly. Patrick leaned forward, those green eyes locked on the paper in my hands. "The communications equipment was a cover story," I continued. "Our actual objective is archaeological in nature. There's a structure buried beneath this location, and we've been assigned to excavate and examine it." The silence that followed was broken by Corporal Stephen clearing his throat. "Sir, what kind of structure? Satellite imagery indicates it's artificial, but beyond that, we're going in blind." "How long has it been down there?" This from Danny, who looked like he was trying to process the concept of finding buried buildings in Antarctica. "Also unknown. Could be recent, could be ancient. That's what we're here to find out." Miguel raised his hand. "Sir, are we talking about some kind of research facility? Maybe something the Russians abandoned?" "Could be," I said, though the classified briefing materials suggested something much older. "We'll know more once we start digging." I spent the next hour going over revised mission parameters, equipment assignments, and safety protocols. The thermal imaging gear would help us locate the structure's exact position. The excavation tools would get us down to it. The ground-penetrating radar would map its layout before we went inside. When I dismissed the team, Marcus stayed behind again. This time, Patrick lingered as well, pretending to organize his gear while obviously listening to our conversation. "Jim," Marcus said quietly, "this doesn't feel right. Since when does the Army send a full platoon to dig up old buildings?" "Since someone decided whatever's down there is important enough to classify," I replied. "Look, I don't like being lied to any more than you do, but we're here now and we have a job to do." Patrick looked up from his equipment check. "Sir, if I may, this could be a significant discovery. Archaeological finds in Antarctica are extremely rare. We might be looking at something that could change history." There was something in his tone that made me study him more carefully. Patrick had always been eager about assignments, but this was different. He sounded almost excited about the prospect of excavating whatever was buried beneath us. "Maybe," I said, "but our job isn't to change history. It's to follow orders and document what we find." That night I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the wind and thinking about the mission. The official story about communications equipment had been a complete lie. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to get us here under false pretenses, which meant whatever was buried beneath the ice was important enough to deceive us. I thought about the equipment manifest. All those items that hadn't made sense for a radio installation. Someone had planned this mission very carefully, right down to ensuring we had everything we'd need for an excavation, which meant they'd known about the structure long before they told us. The question was, what else weren't they telling us? The thermal imaging equipment detected the anomaly on our second grid sweep. I was crouched next to Stephen, watching the screen as he adjusted sensitivity settings. The display showed the usual blue-white of solid ice, but there, 30 meters down, was a dark rectangular outline that definitely wasn't natural. "Got something, sir," Stephen said, tapping the screen with his gloved finger. Structures bigger than the satellite data suggested. Way bigger. I leaned closer. The thermal signature stretched across the entire display, and Stephen was only showing a section of it. "How big are we talking?" "At least 200 meters on this side. Could be more." He switched to a wider view and the structure kept going. "Sir, this thing's massive. Like, football stadium massive." Marcus appeared at my shoulder, breathing hard from the cold. "What did you find?" I pointed at the screen. "Our target. Start marking excavation points. We'll need to dig down in a grid pattern to find the best entry point." The next 6 hours were pure manual labor. 24 soldiers with shovels, ice picks, and portable heaters carving through 30 meters of packed ice. Wind had died to almost nothing, which was the only reason we could work at all. Miguel and Danny took turns operating the small excavator we'd brought, breaking up larger chunks while the rest of us cleared debris. By 1400 hours, we'd opened a section about 10 meters square. The ice got darker as we went deeper, like it was older down there, ancient. When Danny's shovel finally struck something solid that wasn't ice, the metallic clang echoed up from the hole. "Contact," he called up. "Definitely artificial." I rappelled down into the excavation site. The surface Danny had uncovered was smooth, dark metal that didn't look like anything I'd seen before. Not steel, not aluminum. It had this strange quality where it seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. When I ran my gloved hand across it, the metal was warm to the touch, despite being buried under 30 meters of ice. "Keep digging," I called up. "Find an edge or an opening." It took another 2 hours to expose enough of the structure to see what we were dealing with. The metal surface sloped downward at a precise angle, too precise to be natural. As we cleared more ice, the shape became obvious. We were standing on top of a pyramid. "Jesus Christ," Marcus muttered when he saw the full outline. "How old is this thing?" The entrance was on the north face, about 15 meters down from where we'd started digging. It wasn't a door exactly, more like a rectangular opening cut into the metal surface. No hinges, no handles, just a dark gap that led into the structure. When I shined my flashlight into it, the beam seemed to get swallowed after about 10 meters. "Patrick, Miguel, Danny, you're with me for initial reconnaissance," I said. "Everyone else, secure the perimeter and keep digging. I want this entire entrance cleared by 1800 hours." The four of us descended into the pyramid. The opening led to a corridor that was perfectly straight and about 3 meters wide. The walls were the same dark metal as the exterior, covered with symbols carved deep into the surface. The symbols weren't like anything I'd ever seen. Not Egyptian hieroglyphs, not Chinese characters, not even close to any alphabet I knew. They were geometric patterns that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. Our footsteps echoed in the corridor, but the sound was wrong somehow. Too sharp, like the metal was designed to amplify noise. The air inside was dry and warm, which made no sense. After 30 meters of ice, this place should have been freezing. "Sir," Danny said, running his hand along the wall. "These symbols, they're not just carved. Look." I examined the wall where he was pointing. The symbols weren't just cut into the metal. They were inlaid with some kind of different material that caught our flashlight beams and reflected them back in strange colors. Blues and greens that seemed to pulse. The corridor opened into a larger chamber after about 50 meters. Our lights revealed a space that had to be at least 30 meters across, with a domed ceiling that disappeared into darkness above us. More symbols covered every surface, arranged in complex patterns that hurt to look at for too long. "No dust," Miguel observed. "No decay, no corrosion. This place looks like it was built yesterday." He was right. Everything was pristine, like the pyramid had been sealed in a vacuum. The metal surfaces showed no signs of age or wear. Even the symbols looked freshly carved. We found the first artifacts in alcoves along the chamber walls. Small objects made of the same dark metal, shaped like nothing I could identify. Some were geometric, perfect spheres and cubes, and more complex shapes that seemed to fold in on themselves. Others were more organic looking, like tools designed for hands that weren't quite human. "Document everything," I told the team. "Photos, measurements, exact locations. Don't move anything until we know what we're dealing with." Patrick was examining one of the larger artifacts, a cylindrical object about the size of a coffee can. "Sir, this is incredible. The craftsmanship is beyond anything I've seen. Look at these joints. They're seamless, like it was grown instead of manufactured." We spent 3 hours in that first chamber, cataloging 47 different artifacts and taking detailed photos of the symbol patterns. Every surface told a story we couldn't read, in a language that might not even be human. When we finally returned to the surface, the rest of the team had cleared the entire entrance area. The pyramid's north face was fully exposed, revealing the structure's true scale. It had to be at least 60 meters tall, maybe more. The entrance we'd found was just one of several openings visible along the exposed wall. That night, I sat in the command tent, writing my report to headquarters. The encrypted transmission took 20 minutes to send, and the response came back within an hour. 3 words: continue investigating. Report daily. I established exploration procedures the next morning. Teams of 4 would enter the pyramid in 8-hour shifts, with strict check-in protocols every 2 hours. No one went in alone, and everyone carried emergency beacons. We'd map the structure systematically, chamber by chamber, documenting everything we found. Marcus pulled me aside after the briefing. "Jim, what do you think we're really dealing with here?" I looked back at the pyramid entrance, that dark opening that seemed to watch us. "I don't know, Marcus, but whatever built this place, they weren't from around here." Over the next week, we discovered that the pyramid extended much deeper than our initial scans had revealed. The structure had at least 6 levels below the entrance chamber, connected by corridors that branched and twisted in patterns that defied easy mapping. Each level contained dozens of chambers, filled with artifacts and symbols, all in the same pristine condition as the first room we'd explored. The deeper we went, the more complex the symbol patterns became. What had started as simple geometric shapes evolved into intricate designs that seemed to tell stories or convey information in ways we couldn't understand. Stephen, who had some background in linguistics, spent hours trying to find patterns or repetitions that might indicate written language, but came up empty. "It's like they're not symbols at all," he told me after his 3rd day of analysis. "More like instructions or maybe warnings." The artifacts got stranger, too. We found chambers filled with objects that looked like machinery, but with no obvious power source or moving parts. Other rooms contained what might have been artwork, sculptures and reliefs that depicted scenes we couldn't interpret, showing figures that were almost human, but not quite right. Miguel, I chalked it up to stress. We'd been underground for 3 weeks now, living in artificial light, breathing recycled air, sleeping in shifts. The isolation was affecting everyone. Hell, it was affecting me too. I'd catch myself staring at those shifting symbols on the walls, wondering if they were actually moving or if my eyes were just playing tricks. "Sir, you need to see this." Marcus's voice cut through my thoughts. I followed him deeper into the pyramid, past chambers we'd mapped and cataloged, down corridors that seemed to stretch forever. The walls here were different, the symbols more complex, layered in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Here," Marcus said, stopping in front of what looked like a dead end. Except it wasn't. The wall curved inward, forming a perfect circle about 4 meters across, and covering every centimeter of that circle was the most intricate arrangement of symbols I'd ever seen. They weren't just carved into the metal. They seemed to float just above the surface, shifting and rearranging themselves as I watched. "It's a door," Miguel said from behind me. His voice had that distant quality it had been taking on lately. "Has to be. Look at the patterns." He was right. The symbols formed concentric rings that could rotate independently. Some kind of combination lock. But instead of numbers, it used these alien hieroglyphs that seemed to change meaning depending on how you looked at them. Days blended together. The teams worked in shifts, photographing, sketching, measuring. Stephen developed a numbering system for the symbols, over 300 distinct markings arranged in 7 rotating rings. Miguel found matches between door symbols and artifact patterns, suggesting some kind of instruction manual scattered throughout the pyramid. But progress was slow. Every time we thought we'd identified a pattern, the symbols would shift slightly, like they were responding to our attention. Stephen swore the outer ring had rotated a full degree overnight, but our measurements showed no change. The breakthrough came on day 12 of door analysis. Miguel discovered that symbols on certain artifacts glowed faintly when arranged in specific combinations. Not visible light. You had to use thermal imaging to see it. When we applied the same technique to the door, 3 symbols in the innermost ring showed heat signatures. It's responding to something, Stephen said, adjusting the thermal scanner. Temperature's up 0.3 degrees on these three symbols. We tried everything. Touching the heated symbols, pressing them in sequence, rotating the rings to align them. Nothing worked. The door remained sealed, its secrets locked behind patterns we couldn't decode. That's when Danny disappeared. I'd assigned him to Outer Perimeter Patrol, a routine sweep of chambers we'd already mapped and cleared. Standard 2-hour rotation with check-ins every 30 minutes. At 1430 hours, Danny reported all clear from Sector 7. At 1500 hours, silence. Marcus and I found his equipment scattered in Chamber 12. Radio, thermal scanner, notebook, all dropped like he'd simply vanished mid-step. No signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of where he'd gone. The chamber had only one entrance, and we'd been monitoring all movement through the pyramid's main corridors. People don't just disappear, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. We searched for 18 hours straight. Every chamber, every corridor, every alcove large enough to hide a body. The pyramid wasn't that big. We'd mapped most of it. Danny had to be somewhere. He wasn't. Later, Stephen vanished from his guard post outside the door chamber. I'd stationed him there specifically because it was the most secure location in the pyramid. Single entrance, clear sight lines, constant radio contact with the command post. Miguel found Stephen's rifle propped against the wall, safety on, full magazine. His personal effects were arranged neatly beside it. Wallet, watch, a photo of his girlfriend, like he'd decided to take a walk and never came back. I implemented the buddy system immediately. No one went anywhere alone, not even to the latrine. Check-ins every 15 minutes instead of 30. Armed guards at all major intersections. I turned our archaeological expedition into military lockdown, but the precautions felt hollow. How do you guard against something that can make people disappear from secured positions without leaving a trace? How do you fight an enemy you can't see, can't track, can't even prove exists? The remaining team members started looking at each other differently. Conversations stopped when I entered a room. I caught Marcus and Miguel whispering in corners, their voices cutting off when they noticed me watching. The pyramid had taken 2 of my soldiers, and I had no idea how or why. The door remained sealed, its symbols mocking our efforts to understand them. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice I didn't want to acknowledge was starting to wonder if the real threat wasn't something outside the pyramid. It was something inside it. The thought hit me like a physical blow as I stood in the door chamber, staring at Stephen's abandoned rifle. 2 soldiers don't just vanish from a contained environment. Not without help. Not without someone who knew the pyramid better than we did. The accusations started before dawn had fully broken over our camp. One soldier cornered another near the equipment tent, voices carrying across the frozen landscape. "You were supposed to be watching his back," came the angry shout. "How does someone just vanish when you're standing right there?" The tension that had been building for days finally erupted. Voices rose in anger and suspicion. Fear had transformed my professional soldiers into something dangerous, something desperate. At the center of it all stood Patrick, arms crossed, wearing that same calm expression he'd maintained since day one. Too calm, considering another man had just disappeared from his sector. "Always volunteering for solo assignments," someone shouted. "Always first into new areas. Always last to come back." I watched Patrick's face throughout the accusations. He stood perfectly still, letting the storm rage around him. No denials, no anger, just that calculating look I'd noticed more and more lately. When the shouting died down, Patrick's voice cut through the silence. He gestured toward the pyramid entrance, barely visible through blowing snow. "This place doesn't want us here. It's been trying to tell us that from day one. The symbols, the dreams, the way the corridors feel different each time you walk through them." The group went quiet. I could see it in their faces, the recognition, the fear. Because Patrick was right about one thing. We'd all felt it. The wrongness that seemed to seep out of the pyramid like Arctic air. "So what are you saying?" I asked. Patrick shrugged. I'm saying, maybe the pyramid's just taking what it wants, and maybe it'll keep taking until we're smart enough to leave. Over the following days, men continued to vanish. Miguel disappeared during a routine equipment check. Another soldier never returned from his assigned patrol. One by one, my team dwindled. The sealed chamber behind the door held answers I wasn't prepared for. When I finally managed to open it, using a combination derived from weeks of studying the pyramid's alien mathematics, I found them. All of them. 7 bodies arranged in a circle. Marcus, Danny, Stephen, Miguel. All showing signs of violence, stab wounds, blunt force trauma, defensive cuts where they'd tried to protect themselves. But they weren't decomposing. The chamber was preserving them somehow, keeping them exactly as they'd been when they died. And carved into the far wall, in English letters that seemed to burn into my vision, they saw too much. They had to be stopped. Below it, in smaller scratches, "You're next." I knelt beside Marcus's body, my hands shaking. The wound in his chest was precise, angled upward toward the heart. Professional, deliberate. Footsteps echoed behind me. I spun around to find Patrick standing in the doorway, his lean frame silhouetted against the corridor's dim light. His green eyes swept across the 7 bodies, and his expression didn't change. No shock, no horror, nothing. "You found them." The debriefing started while I was still in the hospital bed. Different agencies, same questions, same rehearsed answers. Non-disclosure agreements thick enough to bury a man. The kind of paperwork that makes people disappear if they talk. They gave me a desk job at the Pentagon and told me the nightmares would fade with time. They lied. 3 months later, one of the survivors called. Stephen was dead. Car accident, they called it. Single vehicle, no witnesses. But the caller had talked to him the week before. Stephen was having the dreams too, the same ones I described in the hospital. Another soldier went missing soon after. His apartment empty. No forwarding address. The pyramid might be sealed under tons of ice and snow, but something is still reaching out. Still choosing new guardians. Still protecting its secrets. Sometimes I wake up with dirt under my fingernails, though I can't remember how it got there. Sometimes there are messages written on my bathroom mirror, in what looks like condensation. The door is still open. We sealed the entrance, but we didn't close the door. And somewhere in the ice, in chambers we never mapped, something is still waiting. The worst part isn't the nightmares, or the paranoia, or the constant feeling of being watched. The worst part is knowing that we found something underneath the ice of Antarctica, and it should have stayed hidden.